it's one thing when maybe you start to roll and you're established, but when you're like my wife says, 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒 says, like you're a nobody from nowhere's, who was there then? And do you remember those people? And do you still keep in touch with those people? And do you still support those people because they supported you?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
I like that quote from that TV series Suits. You know, where Harvey Specter says, like, loyalty is a two-way street. If I'm asking it from you, you're getting it from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you had a little bit of a, not really, almost a small break. Yeah. And then March 2020 hits
Yeah.
and you started Conquer COVID.
Yeah. Again, it was a tweet that I put out. So now my wife has to check my tweets before I put stuff out because it tends to pick up. I mean, and not that I have a big follower or anything. It's just, you know, I guess the quality of people that I'm fortunate to be connected to. So what happened was when COVID hit, a lot of us, you know, as you know, we're home. And in particular in Canada, a lot of our frontline workers in hospitals, nurses, doctors, you know, sanitation workers, you know, didn't have access to proper PPE, masks, gloves, gowns. Now, 2 years in, we know a lot more, but back then it was an unknown. And so what we found out was a lot of them didn't have equipment or gear. That's because, like, my mom's a physician, my father-in-law is a physician, my brother-in-laws are physicians. We have a lot of friends who are nurses and doctors, and we were hearing from them, and a lot of them were worried, and their families were worried, particularly if you have people that have health issues. So we decided, 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒 and I, with a couple of friends, Waze Qureshi, Ruby Aldi, who was involved with NoFly, Greg Tilson and Lori Dillon Shaw, we were just like in a WhatsApp group, a couple of us, and then other people quickly joined, and we said, you know, Chris Houston, Natty Malik, and a few others, and we were like, we need to do something. So then you're looking at different ideas. What can we do? Can we get respirators? Can we, you know, that we can't really do that. We can't manufacture respirators. So then we decided maybe what we could do, what Ruby called create a Tinder for PPE. And so basically create a website, and Greg fired it up really quick, where if you're a nurse or doctor and you need PPE, so masks, gloves, gowns, and 95 masks, that kind of stuff, a hand sanitizer, click here. And if you have the stuff to donate, click here. So we kind of matched it up, and our focus was just in the Toronto area. And then it just kind of blew up, for lack of a better term, and more people got involved, and a lot of people wanted to help. And, you know, and then along the way, you know, we were fortunate people were engaged and supported us, and it spread through the medical community. So for example, we took our guidance from the doctors, because they would know. And we were like, what do you need? So one physician told us, we need baby monitors. So we're kind of like, well, what do you need baby monitors for? Like during the lockdown, maybe 9 months from now, we're gonna need lots of baby monitors. Everyone's at home, but right now, what do you need baby monitors for? And what he explained, Sean Mondu, is a head of ER at Hamilton General, said that some of their hospital beds have communications units, but they were getting overwhelmed. So they were putting people, triaging them in, you know, different areas. And so they needed to be careful to protect their staff. So they only had a certain amount of PPE. So they wanted baby monitors, because that would allow the patients to communicate to the nurses and determine if they have to go in and see them right away, or if it's just a request to change a bedpan or just something else, right?
Yeah.
So we were like, okay. So 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒 and Lori then started posting on Facebook to get baby monitors, and they would get them and they would clean them themselves and make sure everything was done, so there was no, you know, transmission of the virus. But we realized we can't scale quick enough on that basis.
Yeah.
So then, using LinkedIn, I figured out who the chief merchandising officer was at Toys R Us, Sean Williams, and a couple other friends of mine were connected to them. They made the introduction, called them up, and I said, look, this is what we're trying to do, and we need you to help us ship baby monitors to hospitals across the country. So he's like, well, how many do you need? And I was like, 500 to start. And they did it, right? And to their credit, we weren't even established like as a non-for-profit yet at that point. But then they vetted us and like, okay, these guys seem legit. And we then started shipping out these baby monitors. And then Volvo Canada contacted us and said, we've just suddenly on social media seen you guys are doing this stuff. We want to help. So we're going to give you a fleet of cars, 18 of them, fully loaded, gas, 407 fees. Matt Gerges was the head of Volvo Canada, and he was like, just drive. Their agency helped facilitate this, who were great. And so we're like, really? And they're like, just drive, just do what you're doing. And so, because now our volunteers were all driving themselves and spending their own gas money and their own thing. So it was great that Volvo provided that. And then the prime minister, I don't know how, picked up on it, and then he announced that. And it was kind of funny, the story that the guy from Toys R Us tells me is that, they sent these baby monitors to us, and it was kind of, they had to make the case. And then his CO one day sees the prime minister doing his daily briefing, in COVID when that happened, and said, I'd like to thank Toys R Us and Volvo Canada and Bombardier and 3M for supporting Conquer COVID-19. And the CEO was just thrilled because it's unpaid exposure on a national level.
Yeah.
So, then the CMO tells me, he goes, Sulemaan, you need anything else? Just, it's done. Like, whatever you want. And I think that's just a function of the spirit of that. And then, other people got involved. 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒, Ryan Reynolds then got involved, and then people like Bob McKenzie and James Duthie and the guys like David Amber and Craig Forrest from Hockey Night in Canada, Sportsnet and TSN got involved, and other people did. And then this thing kind of just blew up. So we ended up in 4 months, like Shopify through Fiona McCown, their foundation donated $1 million. So we ended up raising about $2.5 million in about 4 months. We partnered up with the charity IDRF because we didn't want to touch the money. Like, I'm always careful with money. So they touched the funds, and the funds 100% were used to purchase PPE and distribute it. So in about 4 months, we distributed 3 million pieces of PPE equipment to hospitals and frontline workers across Canada, from Newfoundland all the way to BC and Nunavut. Yeah, it is. And the volunteers were the most amazing part. Like, we grew from 6 to 120 across the country, and these people worked all in. Like, they didn't ask for anything. And, and our partners were terrific as well. So that, again, we use social to amplify that. And that was a credit to the team that was built. And, and we weren't a permanent solution. Like, we were just there to step into the breach.
Yeah.
And then once government stepped in, then we wound it down. And so that's a credit to, again, a lot of people.
Yeah, it was amazing. But you knew a lot more about what you were getting into, right? And you knew enough.
Yeah, that time I had an idea versus NoFly, what was starting to happen. And, but, NoFly, I would say, is pretty special because that was kind of like the first initiative, right? You get, success sometimes when you have a good team and good people and you have, I think, the right goals. It's easier to replicate, but you still have different challenges. But that was something that stepped in, and our corporate partners were terrific. And again, the volunteers, like the medical students from 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒, who behind the scenes weren't on social media, and they're packing boxes and shipping stuff. And we can't toy around here because people need this. Like, I'm not trying to.
There's an urgency, right?
Yeah, like, it saves lives. Like, I'm not trying to be dramatic or whatever, but when you're committing to Etobicoke Hospital that you're sending them 10 boxes of N95 masks, they need it. Like, you can't come late. And that's a credit to folks like 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒 Ahmed and Reza Fakiri and others who all these med school students. So when the pandemic hit, med school shuts down. That's what they did in the midst of their med school exams and studies. So I have a remarkable amount of appreciation for what they did, or the doctors like Ruby Alvey, Jeremy Resmovitz, and others who gave us medical guidance, 𝐓𝐇𝐈𝐒 Gandhi. Like, these are phenomenal people that just helped us and gave us the guidance of what was needed. And so we avoided the bureaucracy of the government and the hospital administrations. Like, we drive a car, Leanne, like right to the emergency and give it to the charge nurse. So there's no, pardon my French, there's no effing around. It's going to the people that need it, right? And you have to do that because when people are donating their money, there's a trust. So I can tell you that of the funds that were raised, 99.5% went to purchase a PPE. The 0.5% went to the credit card fees that we incurred for transactions that were done on the site. We did not keep a dime. Every single dollar went, because that's a trust. You can't, whether it's Shopify cutting you a check for $1 million or someone who's using their disability check to give you $10, that's a trust.
Yep.
So, and that's a credit to Andrew Branyan, who was our CFO, and he ran things real tight, and people like, Fatima Dada, who was our legal and those kind of things. These people are just phenomenal. Yeah.
But you knew enough to sort of set a a beginning date and an end date and what you wanted to accomplish and what you had to focus on, and then you used
Well,
skill to find out who needed what. And so it was, I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of other learnings.
well, there were like some people when things get going, like the big thing I learned is you do an initiative, you have to have an end date. But some people didn't want an end date because, suddenly you're in the press and you've got celebrities and there's money, there's an attraction to that. You have to have the discipline to say, no, right? Like it ends here. We were here for a set time. You don't want to continue that, right? Because the spotlight can become attractive and you have to really, self-reflect and decide, well, why are you really doing this? Is it to help people or is it for attention? And, those were discussions and things that's happened, but fortunately we did shut it down at the time that by the time that was necessary, because then, I don't believe that, I think individuals can help, but I believe that the responsibility ultimately falls on government, right? And they have to be responsible to take care of society.
For sure. I mean, this was just a step in for where everybody was caught a bit off guard, right? Like,
Absolutely.
who had enough of anything? Well, apparently the US had enough of everything. They just didn't know they had it.
Well, the analogy, I guess, to your point was we were like the 101st Airborne. We kind of just stepped in for a bit of time until the main invasion forces landed on D-Day kind of thing. And the group of individuals that I worked with, I'm very proud to have worked with them and, because they stepped up. I mean, these were people too, that some had full-time jobs and families. And so the other hours, they'd be up to 1 or 2 in the morning doing work to help fellow Canadians, and people don't understand that, right? Many of them were in the background. Many of them did not seek spotlight or social media. They weren't doing selfies. They weren't promoting themselves. They're just quietly getting the work done. And I think that that's kind of the ethos that you want to have in any initiative that you do.
Yeah, except if you're trying to get the word out.
That's different, right? But even with that, it's funny, like we wanted to make sure that it wasn't about us.
Yes.
We wanted to make sure it was about the doctors, nurses, the frontline healthcare workers. Like we even had a mandate when we're delivering PPE, don't be in the photos.
Yeah.
The drivers. As long as the nurses and the doctors agreed to it, take the photo of them with the gear, because it puts a spotlight on them and to our donors to see proof that we're actually delivering gear and we're not, stockpiling it or anything, right? And anyone who wanted full accountability of our financials, we would show it to them. So there's proof and there's a paper record, right? Like, so if an investigative journalist wants to come in and ask questions, we'll answer them. We got nothing to hide. Like it's all there, right? And but I think when you make it about the cause and the individuals, that just makes things grow. And then our Instagram and Twitter blew up because more people were seeing that. And I think if you can inspire people to give, I don't think it's about showing off. I think if you're sincere about helping people, then I think people can see that sincerity.
Yeah, 100%. So I don't want to take too much more of your time. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given by anybody in your life?
There's probably 2 that stick out. One was from my wife, because she's a lot better at this than me, where it's just the ability to listen before you speak. And especially when we're working with CEOs and senior executives, the ones that I really admire are the ones that have an ability to listen versus talk. And so my wife has really taught me how to become better at that. And obviously the leaders that I work with have taught me, like you and Alan, how to be better at that. The other piece of advice that clients once told me on a more business related angle was, it just struck a chord with me. He said, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. And I find that to be really true. So those are probably 2 pieces that I would say that stick out for me.
Yes, I'm very familiar with that quote, that piece of advice. And it is good advice. I mean, I use both of those pieces of advice all the time, actually. It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like life, right? Like it's because it's not just business. It's our personal lives too, right? It helps to listen even when we're at home.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for spending the time today.
You're welcome, Leanne. Thanks for having me.